So I've got a couple of questions for you first, if that's all right, gents, to run through. I suppose my first question is, with what we've talked about today, around the evolution of the MSP, how things have changed over the last 10 years, one of the things I often hear when I'm out and doing the sales is people saying, we've been with our provider for 5-10 years, we're happy, we don't review. So what do you think a business that hasn't gone through that review process in 5-10 years, what's the biggest thing you think they could be at risk of or missing out on? Does anyone want to take that question first?
I can.
Wonderful.
I think the biggest thing there, Connor, is that second set of eyes. If you're marking your own homework, and I think that's something that Greg and Steve both alluded to, you can get tunnel vision, and you can get to the stage where if the same engineers, the same personnel with the same perspective are looking constantly, even just a fresh pair of eyes, just to turn around and go, look, does this still make sense? That can definitely be. You can trust, and people can be very capable, and what they have implemented can be right. But that second perspective, go, well, why are you doing it this way? You can sometimes miss that. We do it because it's what we've always done.
And just add to that as well. I think a contract with an MSP should be a contract. Okay, so you should be looking at something that has a predetermined period of applicability. So it is a 3-year contract, a 1-year contract, a 5-year contract. So hopefully it's something sensible. Let's say, for argument's sake, it's a 3-year contract. So 3 years down the road, you are going to review that contract that you have with your MSP, and you're going to invite other MSPs to come along and present to win your business. So your current MSP needs to make sure he's standing up, understands what you're still trying to do, understand your direction, and be able to offer some benefit for you. If you have 3 other MSPs present and you think, crikey, they seem to know more about what I'm doing. They know more about my industry than the other MSPs. So don't forget that. It's the MSPs providing the IT support for you, but it's still your industry, it's your knowledge, it's your IP. So I think it's worthwhile making sure it's a contract, and you have that point at which you have a break clause, and then you have other people present potentially to try and win that business off your current provider.
And I think probably the biggest thing that you're running the risk of doing is just becoming complacent. Just because, and you mentioned it in your talk earlier, one of the most dangerous phrases is we do it this way because this is the way we've always done it. And you're potentially missing out on new technologies, new ways of doing things, changing resources, changing policies, whatever it happens to be. If you're not moving with the times, you're going to be stood still, and to use your motorway analogy, you're going to be stuck on the slow lane, or even on the hard shoulder, So just being complacent, I think that's probably the biggest risk.
I think one of the things we come across quite often is that people don't review because they're scared of that change. It's a big change. Someone will know their operation inside out, but reviewing isn't necessarily a commitment to a change, is it? It's just validating that everything's in the right health as to where it should be at that time.
Well, so I was going to say, you mentioned that people tend not to like change, and I think COVID's affected everyone, it's fair to say, in this room, but from a business perspective, I've worked with so many, especially public sector organisations, that have been spoken about their reduction in office space and moving to an agile working environment, and we've got this 10-year plan to move from a 1-to-1 desk ratio to a 6-to-10 ratio. It's like, great, you're reduction in 40% over 10 years, that's why even bother, sort of thing. COVID hit, and then everyone realised actually we can work from home, we can be safe and secure and still access all the things we need to do and achieve what we need to do, and more often than not, actually, I've certainly found, do more. I can speak to more customers, speak to more prospects, speak to more everybody. If I'm at home in my little office, I can have 10-15 meetings a day. Well, it's not great on one hand, but going to visit a customer, that's probably 2 customers in a day. So yes, obviously it's a horrible thing that's happened as to how we've got there, but there's so many organisations now that have had to move with the times and have had to realise that actually just because this is the way we've always done it, and you're not doing your job unless your bum's on the seat, sort of thing, those changes are being positive.
It's interesting. There's a few things there to just unpack quickly. The first thing is I am. My colleagues in the room will know that I'm a great fan of working from home. You know, I enjoy it. I am sold on the promise of my little room. But as an organisation, and you look at the wider, what that does introduce is a set of challenges that are more difficult to address when people are at home. How do you take young people that are entering into the workforce or new starters? How do you imbue them with the skills and the training, the exposure to the processes of the business? How do you imbue the culture and the attitude, and how you want business to be conducted? How do you deliver that? I think that those are the things that are hard. It's quite easy for us old guys, I'm going to say here, who are seasoned professionals. That's the word, seasoned professionals that are comfortable in that. You know, we know what we're doing. We know how to answer a telephone call. We know how our jobs. We've got our knowledge base. You know, there's a lot of the. You know, if you're a solicitor or lawyer and you've been in the industry for many years, I'm sure that you don't need, you know, many people around you to deliver, and the people you do need to deliver you can reach out to through Teams and for that technology. But if you're the guy that's just started, the girl that's just started, and you're learning, having that person around you has a big influence. And so I think it's a balance, and I think that technology becomes a big thing. And you're right, because that drills into change. In that, you know, it was a big change to send everybody working home. It's been a big change to get people to kind of mix between the two. You've got to find ways of delivering that. And I take your original point, Connor, when you're saying that I think people are afraid of change or fearful of that change, and that is true. I mean, I had hair 3 years ago, so change has an effect. But I think a lot of the times we don't need to be as afraid of it that we actually are. And I think certainly in the IT industry, and I mentioned about onboarding and offboarding, I do think if we take on 12, 15 managed service contracts over the course of the next 18 months, 2 years, there will only be one where there'll be, I would say, significant difficulties in onboarding, where there'll be kind of there's a challenge here because this technology was hidden, you know, or the incumbent provider has held on to something, you know. It's rare that that's a problem. So I think change, we can blow it up in our heads in that it's impossible. You can't work from home. Nobody will do anything. Well, we all operated businesses through COVID. Most of us operated it. But equally, we have to balance those challenges. Sorry, Connor, you need to start coughing in a minute, don't you?
No. I just hope I still have hair in 3 years. So another question I've got to move on from that one, and it was a conversation I was having with Anya just before, is around the MSP side, the support side, and then also the cyber security side. So there isn't a right or wrong way with this, as most things in IT, but it's how does a business decide whether they want their MSP delivering their security services, whether they want to have a level of separation between the two, or whether they just want another party validating. Because it's a hard thing to decide, do we want our MSP doing all the security and marking their own homework? How does a business decide what their strategy is in that space?
Well, if it's ACS, you want us to do everything.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. No. In all seriousness, there's genuinely a very good case for having some of that split. You need some mechanism to validate what's going on. I quite like Cymulate to do that, because I think that gives you a measurable score across lots of different aspects of your security that you can measure over time, and it evolves. So that's a good way of doing it. If you genuinely don't feel comfortable, can't afford to get a second or third party to come in and audit it accordingly. Point in time pen tests by a third party, not the guy that's delivering day in, day out. They have a big value, although we should acknowledge they are point-in-time audits in an evolving landscape, which is again where something like Cymulate or a vulnerability scanner or a tool can help give that evolving view of it. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, I think again, bias work for Cymulate, breach attack simulation, continuous security validation. Of course, I'm going to say you need to be constantly monitoring your security controls. But having those, things like pen tests, they are point in time. yes, you've got a third party coming in to do them, but ultimately it's a person that's coming to do it, and people make mistakes and people have bad days, and we've seen so many horror stories of a red team going in to provide a security assessment on an organisation, and just things going wrong. Whereas if it's an automated process and you've got a consistent and concise approach, it's going to be systems testing systems. So therefore, you're not going to have those issues, and that's where you've got that. In my mind, having that hybrid model of being able to have a third party come in, whether it's complete external or via an MSSP, that's going to give you that continuous validation that what you're doing is right and what they're doing is right as well. They're always testing them and proving their accountability. But being able to have access to that information yourself so that you can have the conversation with your board, with your managers, whoever it needs to have, that things are going the right way, as opposed to just burying your head in the sand.
I think that's really what I like about Cymulate is the scoring, because it takes that information. If I get a pen test report, it's very variable, and it can be better. It can be better. What a human can do is it can do the social engineering piece. A human can do social engineering and deliver that piece. But how do I take that information that's often very technical and convey that to a board to help support a decision on risk? How do I quantify that? And that's where I like the scoring, because people can understand this number's greater than this number. That risk is bigger than this, and they can see a progression. That I think is really valuable. And I think if we're talking about people making decisions at board level that aren't necessarily technical, that don't have that background, you've got to find a way to convey the risk and to help quantify what you're asking them to invest in and what their exposure is. And I think that's where a consistent approach has that merit. The pen test is great for that creative looking. What do you think, Steve?
I was just going to extend it a little bit really as well, because a question was, should your MSP do your security for you as well? I think the answer is not. Definitely. But you've got to look at what your MSP is doing for you as well. So if they're also assisting you with your data protection, it's all about data at the end of the day. Okay, because any virtual machine can be recreated and fired up anywhere, as we know that. Moving to the cloud or on-prem or off-prem, we've gone through all that. It's the data that is key. Okay, so you've got to look at your MSP and say, great, what are you doing to protect my data? Now, 3 ways you can do that. Immediately, you can do snapshots. So you might have a number of volumes and you're going to snapshot them on a frequent basis. You may do that hourly, you may do it every 10 or 15 minutes if it's really critical data. But that gives you a point you can roll back to if you need to roll back your data. If you're attacked or you find that it's been broken or somebody's come in and done something they shouldn't have done to the system. So you start off with snapshots. The one thing in the industry now that people talk about is immutable snapshots. Okay, so I can take a snapshot and then you get the bad boys come in, the bad actors will break into the system and they will change your backup and they'll screw it up for you. And that might be sitting there for some time until you decide you come to need it, and then you go back and find, oh shit, they buggered it up 2 months ago, not last week. So make sure you've got these immutable snapshots, a snapshot that cannot be modified, altered, changed, or mounted. So you've got that protection of data. So do your snapshots, make sure they're immutable. The next thing after that is backup. You do your backups. So your snapshot you might do hourly, no problem at all. You're protected from loss of an hour's worth of data. Do your backups, make sure your backups are there as well. So you may do daily backups. It's only backing up changed data, don't forget. Your full backup's your big one. After that, it's just changed data. So you may do daily backups. You may keep those for a week. You might do weekly backups and keep them for a month. You might do monthly backups and keep them for a year. So over a period of time, you're collecting an amount of data. The final one is archiving. Why continually back up data that hasn't changed? So look at the data you've got, decide how much of that data, and they call it rot data, don't they? Redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So work out what data you've got there, and if it's static data that hasn't changed, you back it up once and archive it, and that sets an archive flag on the files. So next time you back it up, they're not backed up. Okay, so make sure, from an MSP's point of view, they're helping you with the snapshots, immutable snapshots, your daily, frequently backed up data, and then you're archiving data as well. And the archive data can go to the cloud. That can be blob-based cloud storage or whatever name that your cloud provider gives it. So I think that's a good way of protecting the data, and that's absolutely key. But an MSP doing security, why not? You know, they've got access to all the tools, all the utilities, all the reporting to provide to the organisation so they can present at board level that we are protected, and here's why, and here's what we're doing.
It's interesting there, Steve, as well. You talk about immutable backups and snapshot. And one of the, and I agree 100% with everything you've just said there about the importance of them. How I do think we often in industry we miss something with that, because often we start talking about backup, and so it's okay. I had a malware attack. I just got the backup out and I recovered and I went on. There's a couple of things with that. First of all, what's happened to the data that's been compromised? Have they exfiltrated it? Is it now on the dark web? Does that leave you with some exposure from that point of view? And second of all, when did they attack? When did you discover the attack? Because if you recovered all of your systems from your backup a month ago, but the actual original compromise was, I think the industry average at the moment sits at 208 days ago, then all you've done is you've just rolled them back in time a little bit. And so you have to have, allied with the scoring and the understanding and the backup and the protection, you also have to have mechanisms to detect that risk, detect that breach as quickly as you possibly can. Because there's no point in me trying to recover my data. Yes, I can recover my data from 2 years ago, but am I confident that the breach hasn't already happened? Have I not just reinstalled and left the window still open? And also, have I lost any data in between in that period as well? You know, what's my exposure? So I think the temptation is often to go with it's not single silver bullets. They're really important layers of security that you have to have.
Yeah, that's exactly what the phrase I was going to say is. It's about the layers of security. There is no, okay, well, we've got our backup sorted, so we're okay, or we've tested our email security, so we're okay. It's about, you know, making sure you've got all bases covered regularly. You know, even, you know, if you're doing quarterly pen tests, there's still 3 months difference in, you know, how many changes have happened in your environment, every new server you've built, every new vendor you've taken on, every new hotfix, security update, patch, absolutely everything you've done makes a change on your security posture. And in theory, you should be testing that and assessing those security controls, testing your endpoint security and your, you know, DLP solutions with every single change that happens, just to make sure that hotfix, update, patch, whatever it is, hasn't made something worse. Has it fixed that problem, but it's left a gap over this side? If you're not looking at that on a constant basis across all levels, then you're going to run into issues.
To tie back to the first question as well, what you were saying about the backup, an interesting point is if you have sat there for a while, you might be missing areas of backup that you didn't consider if you're not reviewing. One of the big things we talk about at the minute is is backing up your Microsoft 365 tenant, something that people quite often think it's cloud-based, we don't need to worry about that. Actually, you need that secondary retention of that. There's one thing, Steve, I thought you were going to say there, because you love saying this in the office, but I think it's really applicable to this. You can outsource the management and the solutions of your cybersecurity. You can't outsource the responsibility. So I think whoever those solutions and that management sits with, it's still an onus on the business to make sure that they're testing it and they can confidently say, we know there's a backup that's being managed elsewhere, but this is how quickly it would take us to restore. This is how long we hold that data for, so they can report on that and plan the business ultimately around it.
You spot on there with the outsourcing responsibility. You say you can outsource the service, you can't outsource the responsibility. If you don't believe us, ask the Information Commissioner. Don't do it when you've had a breach. but yeah, it's really important that people take an active interest in it, and it should be at board level discussed.
Okay. And is the onus, though, not on us to also help our users understand those cyber risks? Because I don't think we're particularly great at doing that.
I think there's
what tools can we then give those people to help them be better with identifying cyber risk? So I'm thinking about Know Before.
Yes, so there's Know Before is a phishing simulation and security awareness tool that we're speaking to a lot of people about at the minute, and it ties back into what you were saying there. Whilst it's delivering training, it's delivering those assessments. What it's giving to our customers at the front end is a very easy to read risk assessment of individual and business. And that's what we need to do when you're talking about where the responsibility of ACS is. We need to appreciate that our managed service customers aren't all IT managers, aren't all techie. We need to make sure that this information we're providing about risk and posture is consumable and in a business language. That's where our responsibility is, and to give the honest advice of, I think, what solutions best fit that particular business. So,
no, I think on that note, in terms of making sure that people are aware of what they've got and the risks that they have. Everyone's using Office 365, and so I'm working from home. I'm on a technically unsecure internet connection, but all my data is saved in Office 365, so that's okay. You communicate via Teams. But what you don't necessarily know, to me as an end user, is you can create a Microsoft Teams site, and behind the scenes, that's going to create at least 3 security groups. You're going to create a hidden mailbox. It's going to create Azure Active Directory groups and Teams security permissions as well. So you're just making more security groups. You're making your attack surface greater by making it more convenient for you and 2 other people to have a conversation on the internet. And it goes back to what you said about, with the backups, making sure that you've got everything covered. I don't think I've had a 100% confident answer to the question, how many external digital assets do you have? And people just go, oh, yeah, no, I know someone that can tell you the answer, but he's not on the call at the moment, or she's not around. No one has a clue. You might know how many external IP addresses you've got, but how many file servers have you got connected to the internet? How many organisations had to spin up RDP servers at the beginning of COVID, or put in VPN solutions? And security took a back seat, because the primary objective 2.5, 3 years ago was to make sure people can do their jobs. And I think a lot of people took a couple of months out and was trying to work out the best way that they can keep doing their jobs. But the attackers didn't. They had an amazing time. And I think really early on as well, going back to the phishing side of things, when we going to lockdown, was it March, February, March? Yeah. Now, it was probably, I think, end of March, I got my first COVID phishing email. So within 2, maybe 3 weeks, and these are potentially state-sponsored attacks as well, and it's just how quickly it moves. And everyone else is sort of going, oh, okay, but it's fine now, because, IT said it's safe, and there's so many issues there that you need to be kept on top of.
It's 600% rise in phishing attacks, and I think you're right. The light bulb, I think, now we're starting to see is switching for a lot of people that we did rush this, and security, we now need to retrospectively look at that and make sure it's right. I'm sure we could go on that question for a little while, but I'm conscious we want to get to the questions of the audience. So is there any questions anyone has for our guest speakers here at the moment? Surely there's 1 or 2. There we go. Hello, Anya.
So somebody mentioned multi-factor authentication. Where does this sit in terms of a challenge? We've been advised that we can't insist on members of staff have MFA on their personal devices from a HR point of view, and we know that in other regulations like GDPR trumps lots of other things. Where does this sit, and are you finding ways to deal with it?
So in a previous life, I used to work for AirWatch and BlackBerry, so in managing mobile devices. And from a BYOD perspective, yes, you can't force someone to have their device managed, but you can ask them to install an app on it, especially if it's free, and all they're going to be doing is using that to authenticate their VPN or their 2-factor authentication. Ultimately, it's about what I've seen has been successful is, if they don't want to do that, the alternative is that they have to be in the office every day and they have to use their biometric authentication or whatever it is going to be. IT should be there as a tool to make things easier for you, as opposed to blocking you from doing your day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. It's a real challenge. Whenever you're implementing MFP, it's how am I going to do what devices, who's got the right that smartphone, are we allowed to install it, can we insist? There's a couple of things there. I think, Greg, you're absolutely spot on. The classic is, that's fine, this is quid pro quo. We're giving you access to key sensitive information, so we're going to ask something of you to help us secure that. If not, then that's going to affect whether and when you can access it. That's one approach, and I think it's quite a successful approach in my experience. There are alternatives. Multi-factor authentication, believe it or not, existed long before the smartphone came along. So there are tokens, there are different devices. They're not as nice as having Cisco Duo when it flashes up and I press the green button and it logs in for me, like something out of Star Trek. There is a trade-off with that, but that is an alternative. If you've got people and personnel that you genuinely need to be able to give access remotely, but you can't use their smartphone, there's identity keys, there's the traditional little RSA style token with a number that changes every 6 or 7 seconds. They can get that race going. All of those things are options. And then we're also now starting to see with devices, particularly the Microsoft Surface devices, but they're not the only ones, where biometrics are starting to be built into devices as well. And that can fulfill a part of that requirement. But we should be in a post-password world now. Yeah, that's where we should be. I know we're not, because if I ask people to raise their hands if they use passwords in websites still, I think pretty much everyone's going to raise their hand. Yeah. And raise your hand if you might use the same password in more than one place. Yeah, and that's password managers, MFA, they are the cures to that, but it's all much more convenient to have that super secure password that I use on everything, including MyFitnessPal that got breached, and so now I'm compromised everywhere. So we see a lot of that in the real world as well.
Is there a good way around that for people, by the way, the same password across everything? I've got something I do, but...
Just use different passwords.
LastPass is as John said, yeah.
LastPass is a good solution.
Yeah.
LastPass, you've got, as it's been pointed out many times today, that it works when it works. I'm a Mac user, so all of my passwords are stored in a keychain, which is fantastic. I was away at the weekend and had to log on to my Gmail for some reason. I have no idea what my password is. It's all managed on my laptop, and if I haven't got that with me, I can't access anything, so it's really secure.
It's interesting you say that. The reason we're all laughing, ladies and gentlemen, is that Greg plugged his Mac in and broke all the AV earlier, just before the start of this. So we're all running around like loons trying to make sure it could project. So we're blaming the Mac. But you mentioned password. And things like Google, which will save Google Chrome will save your passwords, will now start to tell you if a password's been breached. We actually have a corporate service called Trillions, one of the services that we offer at ACS, where we'll take your domain details, you subscribe. I think it's about £1.50 per user per month, and it will search the dark web for your email addresses, your domain name, and report back any breached credentials. So you can take that report and you can go, yeah, that's the password I used 2 years ago, so we're not using that one anymore, that's not a problem. Or we can go, oh, damn, the FD's password's being sold, around the dark web, and you can act. Of course, none of these services are perfect, but it's certainly a way of becoming aware of when a password is breached.
Thank you very much. Any more questions?
Yeah, just to answer that, actually, we just rolled out LastPass.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just rolled that out in Arrow. Looks like a brilliant utility of what I've seen so far. I've only had it for a couple of weeks now. But yeah, just starting to get used to that. So yeah, that's a very, very good one. The other thing about phones, even down to the very, very first earliest phone, it'll receive a text message. Yeah, that's one thing we do in Arrow when we're accessing Teams or some of the internal VPNs we have to get access to. It is MFA, but it will send a text message with a 4-digit code to your phone. You look at the text message and put the 4-digit code in and carry on.
Cracking. So we'll take any more questions that we've got in the audience. Anyone got anything they want to ask the speakers?
Good question. Just wondering about the MSSP thing. What does that actually look like practically? Is that, if you like, ACS installing Cymulate on our network and then monitoring it? What does it actually look like in practice?
Yeah, it can look like a set of services that looks something like that. At the moment, I would say MSSPs are usually MSPs that are embracing security services, or there are a small group of pure play, we just do security services, and they will be taking products like Cymulate, and they'll be taking solutions We mentioned No before, we mentioned Trillion, those sorts of solutions. They'll be wrapping them up and they'll be saying, okay, as a set of services you can purchase these, and we'll monitor it with our SOC and SIEM partner or SOC and SIEM capabilities, and if you have an incident we can respond. Yeah, you've kind of got this situation where MSPs have initially started, if I go back 3-4 years ago, it was a bolt-on to an existing managed service. We can do this for you as well as security as a service. It's now more standalone services in their entirety as well.
Just to add to that, I think in terms of the Cymulate proposition with ourselves, it depends from customer to customer. I think what looks like a good way of managing it is ultimately as the MSP of the customer using Cymulate, we do some monitoring of it in the background. We action some of the things that we can that are low level to improve that security, but we remember that it's a validation tool for that customer and give them as much power as we can to allow them to independently do that validation as well. Look at it from both sides of the coin and make sure the customer can be independent with it, but we're also monitoring and actioning where we can. But as with all the stuff we've said with security, there's no right or wrong, there's no playbook, so it's a conversation with each customer at this point, isn't it?
And I think from a vendor's perspective as well, it makes it more obtainable to the end customer going through an MSSP. So if you were to come to me and say, right, I want 10 modules of Cymulate, whatever it happened to be, there would be a cost obviously associated to that. You then have to go through the implementation, go through training, and there'll be a time to get you to value essentially. Whereas going through the MSSP, they're probably going to have to provide that software a cheaper rate than you can access it yourselves directly, and they already have all the expertise in-house to deliver it. So as soon as that implementation has been complete, you're going to see value from day one, as opposed to waiting 3 to 6 months down the line to make sure you've got everything installed properly and carried out all the checks, etc.
And it's worth saying there's no one size fits all in this. Not every organisation at the moment needs the same set of technology. So if you're 5 people operating from home using Office 365, then as great as Cymulate is, it probably isn't going to deliver that much value to you. What would deliver more value might be something like No Before. It might be something along the lines of Trillion. That might have more value for you. So we are seeing in this space that those services are flexible, that they are evolving and changing. And looking to match out, because this is a market that's shifting quite quickly.
So I'll put a question to you all then, gents. So if there's one thing that one piece of advice you could give to an SME business now at the moment, considering IT, cyber security, one piece of golden wisdom you could pass on today, what would it be, each of you?
For me, the realisation that it is a post-password world. That's the single biggest thing I think today that's so low-hanging fruit that we should all be doing. We should be moving away from passwords. It solves or helps solve, because nothing's perfect, so many of those breaches. And it's a bit, for me, it's a bit like the antivirus. I'm old enough to remember trying to convince people to buy antivirus software, and they go, I don't need that. Or buy a firewall or update their patches on a daily basis. It is that kind of, it just has to happen now. You can't continue anymore with passwords. It's too error prone. So that'd be my one piece of advice.
I think my probably single piece of advice would be, if your car breaks, you're not going to attempt to fix it. Most people aren't going to attempt to fix it themselves. You're going to go to someone who knows what they're doing, and that's exactly the same from a security perspective. Unless you've got that in-house team that obviously you've then had to fund and pay for and go through all the training and everything else, it makes sense to bring someone in that knows what they're doing, has got the skill set, got the experience, can use their knowledge from other customers and other environments and implement those best practices in yours. So for me, it would be embrace that there's those industry experts out there that you can gain access to for a fraction of the cost of employing them yourselves.
I'm going to go back to the data. I think it's data protection. 100%. You know, as you said, virtual machines can be spun up anywhere. That's just a means of providing web access or creating some sort of analysis or whatever. That any industry, your IP, your intellectual property is your data. If you're not protecting it, you're lost, absolutely lost. Now, in data protection, people talk about 321. If anybody remembers that program with Dusty Bin, again showing my age, thanks Steve. It's 3 copies of your data, 2 types of media, 1 of them off-site. Okay, and as long as you're following the 321 rule, then you've got a good chance of protecting your data. So 3 copies, that could be live production, live production DR, and your iron mounting copy if you wanted to. 2 copies can be on disc and on tape, and the tape copy is the one you put in the boot to take home, or you put in your box and send to iron mounting. But for Christ's sake, protect your data, absolutely key.